All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's me again. We said you see lots of me today, and I am actually super excited to be moderating this fireside chat. I'm really glad that everyone's had the opportunity to get some tea and coffee to kind of give you this last push towards the end of the day. I know we've lost a few people, but they're all coming back in. And I just want to say that, the role of the board is really such an important conversation to put on the agenda. And in fact, we heard earlier this morning from Desmond as well as from Federico in that panel that when you want to have action, it really needs to be driven from the top. And so I'm super delighted to have with us two very distinguished speakers. And I know that both of you have very busy schedules, so I really appreciate the time you've taken to join us. And Swee-Chen, I would start with you. You are the chair of the National Arts Council, NTU. You're an independent director on Singapore Airlines, SP Group, Woodside, and lots more. And you also had the quite difficult position of being the former chair of Shell companies as it went through the energy transition. And today, the conversation that we want to talk about really is what is the role of the board in the equitable transition? And how are boards even grappling with this issue today? So if I can start off with asking you, how have you seen this agenda evolve on the boards that you've been on? And share with us your thoughts.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, everyone. I say this is the graveyard shift, it's 4 o'clock and you guys just have a long day. So hopefully we can keep it snappy and interesting for you. Just maybe a few things in my mind as we think about equitable transition. The first is, in my mind, equitable transition, the board have to consider all aspects of ESG, the environment, social and governance. I would say two other points. One is boards more and more so in the discussions that I've been having do realize that businesses cannot prosper when communities and societies are in strife. And we've seen that through COVID. I think we're going to see a lot more turbulence than we are used to. I find in the past, during the time when I was actively employed full-time, crisis comes one at a time. I feel they take turns to come. I feel now crises don't take turns. They all just lump together and they come at you together. And I think in a world that is filled with crisis and filled with this volatility and complexity, the board needs to play that calming role, take a step back, look at the consequences across the full 3 elements of environment, social, and governance, guide the organizations, the corporation around, how to navigate. And a lot of times, it's really thinking the long term and taking the long view, and taking a multi-stakeholder perspective as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Swee-Chen, for starting us off with those thoughts. And you rightly pointed out the word turbulence, and that is something that we've faced in terms of how unprecedented the crises that we've seen in the recent years. And as stewards of good governance, boards are really kind of primarily responsible for stewarding their organizations through geopolitical instability, uncertainty, sustainability risks in a very new and disrupted world order. And we have a fiduciary duty towards our stakeholders, not just shareholders, and that was the concept that has been challenged, to really kind of help the organizations respond to the challenges of the 21st century. So Shai, I want to come to you because you also sit on boards and you chair the SID ESG committee, which I'm proud to be a member of as well. And there's a lot of conversations around what are the skill sets that directors need, and we'd love to hear your thoughts on where you think boards are.
Thank you, Jessica. So first of all, thank you for allowing me to be the token man on the panel. Too often there are panels with all men and you have a token woman. It's great to see the roles reversed. And jokes apart, I feel a little bit like an imposter sitting between these two powerful ladies who are just such subject matter experts and captains of industry. So thank you for having me. And in the spirit of preamble, also please allow me to just congratulate EcoBusiness on achieving your B Corporation certification.
Thank you.
6th year that you're doing this conference. Congratulations, and thank you for the impact that you're having on the ecosystem.
Thank you.
So with that said, I guess question on skill sets for directors. So maybe a couple of perspectives. So at SID, we've set up an ESG committee, and as Jessica kindly mentioned, she serves on that committee as well as quite a few other people, both from public, private sector, and the intent is to represent the director's voice. And broadly, the agenda follows the ABC of the committee. So the A stands for advocacy. So we want actually in Singapore and beyond to create awareness that the board has a critical role to play in driving climate transition, what we would call climate governance, by directors for directors. B is building capability. So a big focus on training, big focus on acquiring new skills. And C is about connections. And if you think about directorship, first and foremost, it's a team sport. It's not an individual sport. Boards make decisions collectively, and the more connected ecosystems are, the better we can learn from each other to make more considered decisions. So in that background, your specific question about training, I think this, or skills for directors. I think this is a fascinating topic, and for the directors in this room, I would really counsel you to think about skills that you need to serve on the board, following a little bit of a hardware, software, mindware model, right? And by hardware, I mean you need some technical skill sets. So specifically, directors need to upskill themselves around issues around climate science, human rights, the entire spectrum of the ESG. And let's not conflate the issue. The directors are not supposed to be climate scientists. So you don't have to be climate experts, but you need to be at least climate literate so that you know what questions to ask. So there's an element about just the technical side. Then on the software side, it's a little bit about how directors process information and make decisions. There's this sort of theory in business right now that we've moved away from the VUCA world to the Barney world. Has anybody heard of Barney, by the way?
I heard it at the SID conference last
Thank
week
you.
for the first time.
Barney is a fascinating acronym. VUCA, everybody knows, was volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. Barney is brittle, anxious, non-linear, and incomprehensible. Now, acronyms for the sake of acronyms don't mean anything, but I think this is a really important concept. And the reason I bring this up is particularly the non-linearity of today's world and the incomprehensible nature of how directors have to grapple with some of these issues to make decisions. Swee Chen mentioned this earlier, that crises are not coming neatly one after the other. They're all coming together, and this non-linear part, so I guess the point is, directors are trained to recognize patterns, right? So we use prior experiences to apply best judgment for the future. But that pattern recognition is almost gone. I mean, in this Barney world, we can't rely on just, when I was an executive, this problem came up and this is how I solved it. That's no longer going to be the case. So clearly invest a little bit in how you build that judgment so that you can deal with these black swan events, once in a lifetime sort of crises. And then the last part, sort of in training, I would say, is a strong ethos of stewardship. But in the interest of time, we'll come back to that later.
No, thank you very much, Shai. And Barney really is the new reality that all of us have to face. And really, you know, as Swee Chen mentioned, the crises come at us at speed. And it's really something else to have to face up to that. And Swee Chen, I want to come to you on that because, you know, the boards that you sit on, some of them are energy majors. And of course, the energy companies have had quite a tough time in the last decade.
Tell me about
Yeah, during this transition. And I'm sure you must have got many confrontational, difficult questions about the role of the energy majors in the energy transition and in the role that they play in enabling equitable outcomes that also solve the climate crisis. How did you respond to that?
Yeah, you know, I told myself I'm going to keep my responses short, but this one, I have a lot of opinion on this particular
No, please, we want to
question.
hear it. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, and I'll start first with when I was chairman of Shell companies in Singapore, when the CEO of the Royal Dutch Shell Group visits, I spent a lot of time with him traveling in the car, having conversations, and the one thing that struck me was his concern that 10 years from then, if Shell would continue to be a viable company, if its shares will continue to be tradable. And he retired last year. And last year he was here in Singapore. There was a farewell for him, and I asked him, was there any unfinished business? He said his unfinished business was really not being able to get ahead of the energy transition narrative. It is an exceedingly difficult task. And you know, I just want to relay, being on the board of an energy company, you know, directors, you get D&O insurance. I feel being a director on an energy board, you almost need life insurance. Yes. And in the past, so I now sit on the board of Woodside Energy, and it's a oil and gas exploration production entity. And in the past, where the headquarters is and where the AGM is held, we could take a leisurely walk. Now we could not. We have to go in protected car, dark tinted glass, and we have to hide in the basement of the venue until we're ready to go up. And this year in the AGM, a group of activists was hiding behind the stage, about to set off a smoke bomb. Now, why I want to relay this incident is, you know, you get a lot of pressure to be greener than green, this a lot of pressure from activists, and you know, there's threats to your life, there's threats that you will not be voted back on the board, and so you gotta really have a courageous heart to sit on the energy board, and I wanted to be on the energy board. Energy is really one of the key ingredients of human development, of the economy, and we want producers of energy to produce hydrocarbon in a very responsible way. Because we need to, as much as possible, I know it's near impossible, but it is the responsibility of the energy companies to, as much as possible, deliver a strategy that would allow a smooth, orderly transition. It is very disorderly right now, but this is what we need to do. And so it goes back to how do we guide the management team and get them to be, I want to use the word honest about our ability to deliver against, say, a net zero plan. And how do we do it in a way that serves a multi-stakeholder environment? So it's not, you need to still deliver profit, because at the end of the day, you know, when you invest in an energy project, you know, anything less than 10 billion, you can't develop a energy asset. And so you're talking about huge amounts of money. You're talking about investment returns that is usually on the low 10%, if you're lucky. And so you have to really consider all of the elements and not be too threatened by activists, you know, actions. What I worry about is climate change, sustainability has now become an ideology. It used to be a business strategy. You know, it is something that you must do and you need to do because it's you want to use business as a force for good. You want to give those who do not have access to energy. We talk about energy justice a lot. But you know, when it becomes an ideology, it starts to get unwieldy. It starts to get dangerous. Even a world where we have a very disorderly energy transition, it's going to be a very chaotic world. And I'm not saying that because I have oil flowing through my blood.
No, thank you so much, Sri-Chan. Really fascinating story. Thank you so much for sharing with us, because I think when your professional jobs endanger your life, that really is quite sobering, and really thank you for sharing that. And I think that really exemplifies the difficulty and the complex challenges we face here today. I mean, even within the eco-business teams, we are all shades of green, and there are some on the very ideological spectrum, and there are some that are less so, as a reflection of society as well. But as someone who's covered energy for a long time, I started my career as a journalist at the Straits Times, and I don't know if you know, but I used to cover energy, and I was invited by Shell to visit the tar sands project back in 2008. And I was invited to fly over Fort McMurray and witness the oil sands. And of course, it is controversial. Yeah. And when I landed, what really kind of struck me was the communities were so proud of it. They were, this is our livelihoods. It has created jobs. It's enabled my child to go to university. What is wrong with all of you? I really felt that complex challenge, of like, how do you even unpack that? And actually, I came back, and the next year I studied eco-business, and then here we are today, 13 years on, talking about this. But the world has changed so much, and it is not easy to find the consensus, as to how quick, how slow, what is disorderly, what is orderly, and I don't envy directors or boards today. And I want to come to Shai. I mean, we've talked about the skill sets, and we've talked about the mandates for directors to have a fiduciary duty to look at these issues. But how are you thinking about these complex challenges, and how do boards know when to push more, and how do they guide management, like Srijan has mentioned?
Yeah, and very important question. And Jessica, you serve on boards yourself, some leading boards, and looking at sustainability agendas. There is no one answer. There is no silver bullet, unfortunately. And a big part of this is also just needing to apply judgment, needing to apply good business sense. But perhaps, sorry, my day job is a consultant, so my backup is always, when I'm asked a tough question, is to rely on frameworks. So one of the frameworks that I think the World Economic Forum has put out, and so just by way of background, the World Economic Forum set up this organization called Climate Governance Initiative, CGI, and the purpose of CGI is a by-director, for-director forum to allow directors to focus on climate transition and specifically focus on the sustainability priorities. CGI, and Jessica, I'm very fortunate I serve on the global governing board of CGI, and we set up the Singapore chapter. So if anybody is interested in finding out a little bit more about CGI and the work we do in CGS in Singapore, please reach out to us. SID will be very happy to share that. But they came up with a framework on these 8 principles of climate governance. And even though it's focused on climate governance, I think the principles will still apply to the broader sustainability. And just thinking through those, it's a really powerful way of structuring the board's agenda and structuring the board, where the board spends its time. So first and foremost, it's about the mandate, the accountability on the board. Second principle is command of the subject, which goes a little bit to your training, goes a little bit to the skills that you need. Third principle is structure of the board. So how do you structure the board, committees, management, to make sure that you're giving this enough attention? Fourth is about materiality. So you're understanding the risks and actually looking at every part of the business and assessing the impact, the physical risks, the transition risks, and increasingly, and this is where worlds converge. In my day job, I work for a company called Willis Towers Watson, which is a global professional services company. And actually, we have come up with a third category of risk, which we call liability risk, exactly for the reasons that you mentioned, that for directors, D&O is not enough anymore, right? Because the liability risk, both for directors and for management in some of these transitions, are really complex. But sorry, just moving on, then you have materiality, you have incentives, and incentives, passion area for mine. There's this old saying, good thing about incentives is that they drive behavior. The bad thing about incentives is that they drive behavior. And board members, we have a responsibility to encourage the right behaviors and discourage the wrong ones. And there are some really good examples of how companies are using management incentives, KPIs, compensation, to actually drive climate action. Some even notable examples here in Singapore. And sort of the last is around exchange, which is, again, having access to information and learning from each other. And if you put all of these sort of together, it just gives boards a good structure about how you go about dealing with these issues. But to be honest, a lot of this will also depend on, first and foremost, your company's strategy. I'll give you a couple of examples. So the couple of boards that I serve on, one is a real estate company and the other is a tech business. In the real estate company, a lot of this started from a compliance mandate. SGX has asked us to do this, so we must do this. But now it's moved beyond that because we are beginning to realize that actually consumers are willing or choosing to stay with us if we can satisfy certain climate priorities and show that our footprint is at a certain level. Otherwise, the global sort of deals that you get for even hotel stay won't happen because otherwise we won't meet their scope 3 emissions. The technology business is actually using this as a differentiator, saying how can we win more customers if we can be green? I've said a few of these things before, but I'll end with this. Everything that boards do, everything that companies do from sustainability, let's not kid ourselves. Companies that are doing this well, they're not doing this solely out of the goodness of their hearts. They're doing this because there is a business benefit. I'm a little bit of a movie buff.
It's a little bit of heart.
It's a bit of that's why I said not solely out of the goodness of their hearts. There is a business benefit as well. There's this famous line from The Godfather. It's not personal, it's strictly business. But as Sweechan says, it's a little bit personal and strictly business.
No, thank you so much, Shai. In fact, I will, mention that Federico mentioned earlier today in the proceedings that it is both personal and business. Especially for a country like Philippines who live and breathe climate events almost every day. But really interesting, Shai, what you said about putting it on the agenda, because I joined the board of ComfortDelGro 5 years ago, and I very recently joined the board of Wilmar International, which is one of Asia's largest agribusiness groups. And each time when I consider, whether to make that commitment or not, you do evaluate, the liability, the risks and things, like Sweechan mentioned, it takes courage, to join something because you are then legally responsible. I want to touch on this aspect of legalities as well as climate litigation, because we've seen that litigation is on the rise, whether it is on energy and climate change fiduciary duty. All the energy majors have been sued by climate activists. Now there's deforestation laws that make directors directly liable as well. And then we have also a lot of law firms, issuing legal opinions. How do directors grapple with that? If they are joining an organization and they want to create value and guard their organizations against risks, but also to their own personal risk. How do you even begin to grapple, Sweechan?
Yeah, I think you have to go back to first principles of the roles of a director. So the roles of a director includes one, stewardship, right? Because you are there almost as a trustee, although it's a for-profit board. But your role there is to make sure that this is a company that could sustain, could endure time. And so you have to just stay true to that, and I know it's a very well used saying, the do well, do right, do good. I like to break things down to very simple things so that I can remember. So when you're on the board and you're making decisions, it still goes back to those 3 simple principles: do good, do well, do right. And how do you do that? You have to consider, again, I go back to what I said earlier on, the stakeholder, of course, the key stakeholder group are your shareholders. Your employees are major stakeholders as well. An engaged employee usually drives more innovation, more creativity, more adaptability. And they are important. Your customer, more and more so we talk about being customer centric. Your customers are also a key stakeholder group. And I want to just bring up an example. Shai and I was just talking about it, and I had wanted to talk about it as well. Shell does a lot of scenario planning, and we look, 40 years, 50 years. Sometimes we look at 100-year energy systems, right? Never in our wildest dream would we have dreamt up a scenario where the skies would close and airplanes cannot fly. And I sit on the board of Singapore Airlines. And during this period, so with airlines, there are a few challenges during this period. And clearly, one of them is you literally have zero revenue because the planes could not fly. So what do you do, right? Again, from a board perspective, these three principles, do good, do well, do right, has to be in your mind as you make decisions. And the other one is the endurance of that organization, because can you even sustain, if you guys remember, it was 2.5 years before flights could resume. Even up to today, the flights are not to the same level as pre-COVID. And so I had said right at the very start that when a board considers its decision, when we talk about sustainability, it cannot just be the E. It has to be the E, the S, and the G, right? So for Singapore Airlines, in the middle of COVID, when it had literally zero revenue, it took the decision that it was going to commit to a net zero. And we say the path to net zero by the year 2050 wasn't exactly clear, but we know what some of the short-term actions are going to be. We know the longer-term actions are continuing to renew the planes, because the newer planes are more energy efficient and therefore less emission. And you could get its low-hanging fruit. You could reduce emissions by a magnitude of about 30%. And then next, what do? You reduce plastics. Now, this is one thing where I want to talk about consumers, right? So you want to reduce plastic, and what do, right? You get rid of the plastic meal boxes, and you translate. You use paper boxes as well. But there was a huge backlash because the passengers didn't like the paper boxes. So we thought, we shouldn't give up. SIA need to do a better job of communicating and actually make paper boxes more presentable. So you continue to try to say, what can you do to reduce plastic, to reduce waste? And I think one important decision is during a time when you are bleeding, I would say about $300-400 million a month. One natural reaction would be you cut down on your workforce. But the board had a discussion, and we were really clear that we want to set SIA, when skies open, it will be the first off the runway, being able to carry passengers, being able to deliver the premium service that it is so proud of and it's committed to. And therefore, it took a really deliberate decision. If you notice, during COVID, it allowed its staff to take 2 jobs. So you're still employed with Singapore Airlines. You can do a job outside, especially in hospitality. The job cuts were to a minimum, and so when the skies opened, SIA was one of the first who could really start flying. So I wanted to give this example around why it is so important that the board and management work together and really get very clear on what are the necessary choices that you need to make in order to ensure that you have a sustainable and enduring company.
Thank you so much, Swee Chen, for that really uplifting story. I'm a diehard Singapore Airlines fan, and I can tell you
Please
that your
continue
ticket,
to do so. Yeah.
your ticket prices are very high now. I think most people will agree with that. But thank you for putting equity in that story, because I remember the very difficult conversation we had on the ComfortDelGro board during the pandemic as well, because suddenly nobody was traveling back and forth. Taxi drivers, their income dried up overnight, and there was was this whole conversation about rental. We make our revenue through renting out taxis, and we had that difficult conversation as well, like how much subsidy do we give? Because, we literally also had all revenue dried up. And the board also made a very conscious decision that, no, we must give, substantial rental rebates. I think it was almost like 80-90% at one point at the height of the pandemic. And also on cutting the staff. There were talks about retrenchment, but we also said, no, what does it say about us as a company if we retrench people at the height of the pandemic? And it's all very difficult conversations, but I like your 3 principles of what boards need to do. Shai, I want to come to you because, I had this similar conversation in the Unlocking Capital for Sustainability event in KL just 2 weeks ago with our Malaysia team. And Carla, who is on the Climate Governance Malaysia Council, and she's a colleague of Sunita, who spoke in our opening plenary, she mentioned to me, hey, this equitable transition is all great, but Malaysia boards are only just beginning to grapple with climate risk and sustainability reporting and ESG disclosure. How are we even going to think about that when we haven't even got a clear understanding and execution of those strategies? And I wanted to hear from you because obviously you advise many boards as well. So is this topic too premature for boards? Do they really care?
It's a great question, and I think in some of the Slido questions we've had some similar themes there as well. But first of all, I just want to applaud Singapore Airlines for that story, and also ComfortDelGro. I think fortunately all three of us have a story of no retrenchments. So the board that I'm on is Far East Orchard, which is the hospitality player, and again we took a very similar view that even when times got tough, we're not going to sort of cut the workforce. Instead, we pivoted a little bit towards the quarantine business and helping the government in its fight against COVID. And that kept people gainfully employed, but it also sort of helped the nation's response to the COVID crisis. But again, all these are examples of how boards need to pivot, and sometimes you may need to change your strategy, sometimes you need to change your focus areas to deal with the particular crisis. But then coming to your question around sort of the evolution of boards, I will say, Jessica, very much, it's been a journey. And I know that phrase gets used a lot, but it's very much been a journey where there is an evolution from, or rather, the consulting work that we do, we see 3 different archetypes of companies. One group of companies and boards who think of this issue very much as a compliance issue. Check the box exercise. The stock exchange has asked us to do this. The regulators have asked us to do this. Let's do the bare minimum and move on. Other group sort of takes a little bit more pragmatic approach to this. There is an element about driving performance. So the first bucket is conformance, the second bucket is performance. And here you're looking at 1 to 3 year strategies about how can sustainability priorities help you improve the performance. And the role of the board there is to guide management to help improve performance. Admirable, the right thing to do. And I would say here again, sort of this is probably the group of companies who are thinking about sustainability as a core part of their business strategy. But in the journey, and if you get to the third bucket, which is transformation, so again, borrowing from SID's recent tagline in the conference, conform, perform, transform. And the transform is where companies and boards are thinking about not just 1 year, 3 year strategies, but 10, 15, 20, 100-year priorities, right? And I've always felt this, that even my role as a director, it comes down to the stewardship principle. Swee Chen used a very interesting phraseology about defining stewardship. For me, as a trustee, I think of the role of a board member or a steward as a custodian. Not an owner, definitely not a boss. By the way, that's another pet peeve of mine. In this part of the world, board members are often referred to as the bosses, and the chair is referred to as the boss. Not a boss. The CEO is the boss, if anybody is. The CEO and his or her team are managing the business. Directors are only directing. They are stewards, and in my mind, we are custodians of assets that are entrusted to us. And as stewards, our responsibility is to protect and enhance value for the long term. So on that evolution, I would say the third bucket are really progressive companies who are making tough calls in the short term so that they can reap the benefits in the long term. And by long term, I don't mean 1 or 3 years, 10, 15 years down the road. Often in forums like this, people talk about organization purpose. And I often get a question, Shai, what is more important, purpose or performance? And every time I get that question, what is more important, purpose or performance? My answer is yes. In that both are important, and it's not the right question to ask.
Yeah.
The more germane question is, what's more important to your stakeholders, short-term performance or long-term performance? Because this third bucket that I'm talking about, companies that are focusing on transforming, they are sowing seeds today and taking some short-term pain so that 15, 20 years from now, they will have a sustainable, viable, financially sound business. And that trade-off is not an easy trade-off to make. So short answer to your question, I think in this part of the world, it is still a journey. We still have a large part of our SME, small to medium listed companies in the compliance part. Increasingly, the pendulum is shifting. One final point I'll make on this. I think it's also important to look at the cultural differences or the geographic differences we have in this part of the world that are attributable to our shareholding structures. Right? A lot of what is spoken about sustainability and corporate governance has a very Anglo-Saxon mindset to it. But in this part of the world, a large number of our companies on SGX as high as 60%, a large number of our companies have a controlling shareholder. The controlling shareholder is either government or government-linked or sovereign wealth fund-linked or family. And if you are in that type of company, then your orientation towards some of these decisions naturally is much longer term. So it nudges you a little bit further to buckets 2 and 3 that I spoke about, the perform and transform part. Because no long-term steward, owners in this case, the shareholders, want the value of their assets to drop and the business to just be completely defunct. So it's really important to think about this conform, perform, transform. And if any of the companies here find themselves on the compliance category, there are gentle nudges that you can use both with your board and your management team to shift towards the right.
Thank you so much, Shai. I think you borrowed the SID theme, conform, perform, transform, from last week. And thank you for that dimension you've added about the time horizon, because I often get asked this question, sustainability is expensive, and why are we being obliged to do this and that? And I always say, once you expand your time horizon, sustainability is not a cost, it's an investment. And then you will get a return. And I think, as directors being custodians, we need to have long-term horizons, otherwise we, won't be able to help our organizations navigate this. I'm going to give an opportunity, mix it up a little, for anyone in the room who might love to give a reflection or have a question. And I see someone there. If we can get a microphone to Ken, and we will take a question very quickly. If I could ask you to keep it brief so we can go through the questions that have come in from Slido as well.
I'll try and keep it brief, Jessica. Just very interesting what Sui Chen was saying about Singapore Airlines, because some of you might not be aware, but 40 years ago next month, I came to Singapore as a consultant for Singapore Airlines in the early days, early days, but I was helping, and I'd love to talk to you a little bit about that. But interesting now, looking at sustainable aviation fuel, and I know Singapore Airlines is looking at this, biofuels, other sources. We have Neste set up in Singapore producing aviation fuels and doing it with used cooking oil. We have a company here called Alpha Biofuel turning used cooking oil into biodiesel. And do you think Singapore Airlines, like many airlines, is seriously investing in this as a future fuel? Because I know airlines globally have looked at all the alternatives in terms of alternative fuel efficiency, market-based mechanisms. So is Singapore Airlines really committed to that, and how involved is it in perhaps encouraging the advance when we need scale, obviously, with SAF?
Thank you.
Ken, the short answer is yes. And so in the board right now, what we're discussing is what's that percentage of SAF. I think the issue is still, and Singapore Airlines has also made commitments on SAF offtake from these producers, and also the other discussion is how do we incentivize? There was a program earlier in the year where we offer corporates SAF credits to offset. Disappointingly, the offtake, the demand was very low, it was in the less than 10%. But I said earlier on about just not giving up because my frustration with sustainability is people look at just a slice of it. It's become more and more an ideology. But when it comes to putting your money where your mouth is, there is still a great deal of reluctance. So I think my encouragement to Singapore Airlines is don't give up. Just because it failed the first time doesn't mean it's not a good idea. We have to go back and look at what could we have done better, what would have resulted in a better outcome, and then try again. Because we need to get the entire ecosystem to work in order for us to achieve the net zero ambition. Because it cannot, I think Shai used the word team sport. It truly is a team sport. You cannot just have the corporation playing their role, because it feels sometimes like climbing up a hill with a backpack, and each 500 meters you take, someone put 2 bricks in your backpack. So you gotta have the consumers playing a role. You have to have the government having the right policy in place. So I don't know, you may be aware that there is a group that has been established. There are some firm plans that are being developed to create this air hub that we have here in Singapore as I don't know what's the right word to use. I would say to achieve a carbon neutral position for the air hub here in Singapore. So, but one thing I would say is SAF is still quite in short supply. And from a principle perspective, fundamentally, you say it used cooking oil as feedstock. And if you hear the stories from the past, why was plastic invented, right? Those baseball used to be made up of plant material. And so plastic was invented because, you don't want to compete with access to food. That's why plastic was invented. So, at that time, it sounds like it was a do-good thing, but now it's a bad idea. So with SAF, I think we have engine companies who are now saying that by the year X, all the airplane engines would be able to take 100% SAF. But I don't know if that's the world we want either. So for me, it's always a lot about balance and making decisions that would allow for a smoother and more orderly energy transition.
Well said. Thank you, Swee Chen. Asha, you wanted to add?
Well said, Swee Chen, and balance being such an imperative word. Ken, thanks for the question. It just prompts another thought about, not related to this example, but just avoided emissions, right?
Yes.
Which is often referred to colloquially as Scope 4. And so we're having some of these conversations at the World Economic Forum, but it wouldn't be a wonderful sort of situation and an incentive for companies to continue to innovate if they come up with a new SAF, new biofuel, new avoided emission that can impact the entire industry, then they get some credit for it. The earlier conversations about carbon credits, wouldn't that be wonderful if we switch the conversation instead of carbon credits to avoided emissions credits?
No, that's a great thought, Shai. In fact, we had an event yesterday, our curtain raiser, which talked about avoided emissions. But I think one of the challenges in that is that, there was the example of like communities in Congo, if like you pay them to not cut down the forest for a year, then the next year they'll be like, well, pay me again. Oh, I'll cut down my forest, and then pay me again. Or, and so how do we not get held ransom, I suppose, to this concept of avoided emissions? But it's so interesting, and that's also why, 20 years down the line, I'm still super fascinated by these complex issues that sustainability throws up. There have been quite a few questions at Slido. I can't take all of them. I'm just going to take one there is a theme that I see, which is executive compensation. And I'm going to come to you, of course, Shai. At Willis Towers Watson, this is something you do as your day job. We've been talking a lot about aligning incentives, and you talked about behavior, right? How it is incentivized good behavior and bad behavior. Have you seen Asian boards put KPIs into the compensation schemes of their senior management to hold them accountable?
Yeah, thank you, Jessica. And short answer, well, unfortunately, there's no short answer for this one. It is a yes and a no. First, let me start by saying, as we all know, there is no one Asia, right? So even within Asia, we see differences in Southeast Asia, I would even say Hong Kong, Taiwan, separate from mainland China, Japan, and then Australia, slightly different. And the level of maturity and or alignment, and the imperative word here being alignment between management's interests and board's interests and sustainability priorities through executive pay, the level of maturity slightly differs. So that was a preamble, but short answer, yes, there are quite a few examples and some bright spots. So WTW, so we're the world's largest, oldest executive compensation consulting firm, and we just recently completed a study of 1,000 listed companies globally. The first time this study has ever been done globally, including Asian companies. And around 90% of companies in Europe have some linkage to ESG measures, not just climate, ESG measures to executive pay. That number is around 75 in North America, which is a separate story, and we don't have enough time to talk about North America today. In Asia...
We have the US ambassador turning up, so...
in Asia, or Asia Pacific, I would say, first of all, there is an issue of disclosures. Not enough companies disclose which KPIs they use for incentives. So of the companies that we reviewed here, only 60% disclosed which KPIs they use. Of the 60% that disclosed, 63% actually had some linkage to ESG measures, broader ESG. But specifically climate, the bright spots I wanted to highlight is, I would say some of the leading companies in Singapore, and all of this is public domain information, I'm not sharing anything confidential, but the likes of the Temasek portfolio companies, the CapitaLand, the Keppel, the Singtel, the Sembcorps, all of these have a certain component of their executive pay linked to specific decarbonization goals. So TCO2e reduction, starting with scope 1 and 2, and in some cases even going up to scope 3.
Amazing. Suishan, have you seen that?
Just add
Yes.
on that? Yeah. I think in the boards I sit in, I would say all of them would have some sustainability, some compensation tied to sustainability measure. The thing I would say is this, though. I think the board has to keep management honest in how the targets are set and what's being set. And how do we do that, right? So in the boards that I'm in, one, I would insist that we do a bottom-up. And we have a very robust way of measuring, and it has to be bottom-up. So that's one. Two, it's if it's early days, allow time to test run. Because you don't want to the good news and the bad news with sustainability, it's in every board conversations. It is ubiquitous. It is everyone's talking about it. It's almost like if you don't talk about it, you are a dinosaur from the gone eras. And because of that, sometimes you either get too enamored or you try to keep up with the Joneses and you make the wrong decisions. Because wrong decisions in sustainability can be very costly. And so I would say I would always look for bottom-up measures and I would allow time to test run.
Thank you so much, Suich.
Sorry, this is such a really important point.
Okay.
Bottom-up measures allow time to test. Jessica's heard me say this before, and particularly when it comes to incentives, don't let perfection be the enemy of the good. That is so true here, because when it comes to executive incentives, management tend to default to having specificity and having a view about how will they achieve those KPIs, right? And for most of the KPIs, there are playbooks. But when it comes to some of the climate goals, the playbooks are being written right now, so nobody has all the answers. So the board has a critical role, bottom-up, but just also giving a bit bigger tolerance when it comes to the achievement and the incentives. There's this old saying, structured discretion is not an oxymoron, right? That's a core part of what the board has to do.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Sri Chen, for that. And also to emphasize that we do need time to make good decisions. And that was one of the lessons I learned as well coming onto a board, because in my day job, I'm an executive, and then on the boards, I'm non-executive. And I'm like, why is it taking so long to put in this thing? You know, it's like a year and we've talked about it. And my previous chair used to tell me, Rome was not built in a day. Be patient, Jessica. And I have taken that, into account, because with large organizations, you have to do the things like get buy-in, really consider all the factors to make good decisions. So yeah.
I think one of the changes, like from an executive to a board member, it's like nose in, sit on your hands. So you got to know what's happening, but you cannot jump into decision making, because it's not you guide, you steer, but a lot of times you cannot do the job of the management.
Yes, for sure. And that has been a really interesting experience. We've come to the end of the panel, and I just want to ask two of you if there's one word of advice that you can give to directors and management who are in this room today. What would it be for them to help them deal with the VUCA, BANI, equitable transition world? Shah, you go first.
It's a tough one, but okay. There was this very interesting article, and the headline of it has stuck with me. And the headline is, ESG is dead. Long live the E, the S, and the G. And what I mean by that is, the ESG, because it's become so politicized, because it's become an ideology, it is starting to have slightly negative connotations, which can distract the board, which can distract management. Don't let the ideology, the politicized nature, deter you from your course. So you've heard Larry Fink say very publicly that he's not going to use the term ESG anymore. So put all that aside, put the noise aside, focus on the work that you have to do. Focus on the work that you have to do in the E, the S, and the G. And if you focus well enough on this and have alignment, great things will follow.
Excellent,
Yeah,
thank you.
I was going to say the same thing. So great mind thinks lie shy. Yeah, I was going to start first also with a quote. So Margaret Atwood, I think many of you know, she's a Canadian writer. She wrote an article, and the article said, it's not climate change, it's everything change. And if you do a mind map, right, or a systems map of climate change and the implication, and you take a step back and you look at what you draw out, it keeps me awake. The implications are huge. And it just affects so many aspects of our lives, but don't look at it as risk. There's plenty of opportunity as well. And there are so many numbers that floats around that talked about the opportunity of the energy transition, the opportunity of investments, and how much money. And I hear trillions of dollars being quoted, right, that is required to take us to net zero. So that's both risk and that's opportunity. So it's not doom and gloom. I don't like it when people stand up and pound their chests and say, sense of urgency, we have to, we are too late, and start to scold. It really is an opportunity, and I say the future is bright for the curious, for the innovative, for the creative, to really do good, do well, do right.
Thank you. And on that note, please join me to thank my panelists for this really insightful conversation on the role of the board. Thank you so much. Thank you.